Now I will give the floor to Jan Eliasson who will tell us more about the action plan, how to reach the Paris Agreement. A big applause for Jan Eliasson.
Thank you very much. It's a great honor to speak after Laurent Fabius, who did such a fantastic job in Paris 2015, and was also a friend. We've been on many barricades together, and it's wonderful to have you here. And I think you should definitely continue your role as a mentor on the environmental and climate scene. And you should definitely continue to give advice to the Brits, even to the Americans, I would suggest. Apropos optimism or pessimism, may I say that, in my view, humanity is divided into 4 categories. The extreme optimists, everything will be okay, you don't have to do anything. The extreme pessimists, everything will go to hell, doesn't matter what you do. And then there are 2 categories in between. One category to which I belong is the optimist who is worried, the worried optimist. And then there is the 4th category, pessimists who have not yet given up. So you decide where you are. Wonderful to be here with you. I'm glad also the EU is so actively involved. I think European Union has a key role for the future. I think the Green Deal is a big step forward. And I think Europe, in the present geopolitical and geoeconomic context, has a very important role, and Europe should accept that role. And Sweden should be driving in this respect, and I'm sure the State Secretary and the Minister will continue to do so. The timing is great for this meeting here today, with the COP meeting, working hard in Madrid, not making much progress. And I admit that, of course, that COP process is important. But I also think it is important that we see the needs of action on the climate change issue in the broader perspective. It implies action on so many fronts that it should be also accepted by a full government and a prime minister and political leaders. And Laurent, you recall that you and Ban Ki-moon back in 2013, I think, decided that we should have a leaders meeting in 2014 to instill political will to the COP process. So you need both the COP process, but also an awareness of political leaders that they have responsibility. So I think the combination of COP working and bringing in the different actors on the scene, that is so important, but also the mobilization of political will is so important. And I think if you look at the Greta phenomenon, the Greta effect, it is really a very important and a bit sad reminder that you push a button and then you see a lot of feelings and aspirations and dreams come up like an explosion, which means that the political life has to, in the future, listen to those people who are, looking to a future where they can live decent lives. So I think that is also added to the perfect timing of this discussion. I will now move to the SDG process. I go back 4 years, 2015. I was Deputy Secretary General, and Laurent Fabius was Foreign Minister of France, and Ban Ki-moon was deeply committed to action. But we thought that, as you indicated, Laurent, that we needed to see the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030, as an action plan for also the climate agreement. Because if we really fulfill this ambitious goal of the SDGs, then we are in fact contributing to going down to at least 2 degrees, even 1.5 if we do what we should. Key issues like carbon tax and stopping subsidies to the fossil factors, fossil sites and so forth. I met, when we had finished these negotiations, I met Johan Rockström. It's a name that is well known in this room, a great scientist and a great advocate for action. And he commended what we had done with the 17 goals. I have them here on the lap. I see some of you have it here. Thank you very much. And he commended us. He said, you should have a name for it. You should have a sort of a heading. And I said, well, it's Agenda 2030. No, that's not strong enough. And I said, in the UN, we call it the Action Plan for a Sustainable Future. It's not much better. Be more practical. So I said, how about a toolbox to repair the world? Oh, that's better, said Johan. But then on his way out, he thought of this connection between SDGs and the climate agreements. He said, I know what we should call it, a survival kit for humanity. And I think this says it all. When we had these negotiations, which lasted for 4.5 years, and I'm glad I have in the room Sigrun Ravet, who was working on the Swedish side in the negotiations, and who is now the deputy director of CIPRI, and made sure that we are working now in the direction of defining security as also climate security. So if we don't deal with the climate change positively, we will have crises and conflicts in the world. But when we then had that discussion, we asked ourselves, are we too ambitious? But we don't have time not to be ambitious. We set an extremely ambitious goal, and also established for the first time that these goals are absolutely universal. If you look back at the MDGs, they were 7 out of 8 goals were directed to what we call then the developing countries. I today say that I don't make a distinction between developed and developing countries. We are all developing countries. But now these 17 goals are applicable to all. And I would say the rich countries, the prosperous countries, even have a greater responsibility in terms of sustainability to do the job. So I was surprised, in fact, in my positions leading this work from the Secretariat, that the member states really accepted to go that far. And I'm glad to say that the United States left the climate agreement. They haven't left the agreement of September 2015. And I think we should see that they are also interrelated, that they are mutually reinforcing, and that by this you add an element which is important to get things done in today's world. You have to go horizontal. You have to connect peace and development and human rights. There is no peace without development. There is no development without peace. And there is none of the above without respect of human rights. But also you need to go beyond the governments and the international organizations area. You need to go into the private sector. You need to go into the cities. You need to go into the civil society, go into the academic world. All actors have to now put the problem in the center, and a glass of water is a very important problem, and then gather around anyone who can contribute to this problem, and then reach in the end some type of division of labor. That's the whole idea behind the SDGs. And we very much now hope that it is going to be implemented and really taken seriously. The issue that I think we pointed to, we had an early discussion, Jan Eliasson, who is very active in the Viable Cities project and also as a former finance minister, discussed with Laurent and me before this meeting whether we shouldn't really try to develop more of a economic theory, a paradigm on combining the result of the low interest rates and so much of savings we have in the world with the need for investments. There's a tremendous need for investments, but there is a lot of savings. And we need to sort of combine the two and use the SDGs and the climate change, need for climate change, as a vehicle to bring about financial resources flowing to a much larger degree to this area. So I leave it to you to think further into this area. I had an interesting experience which helped me come to the conclusion that we should move in this direction. It was a visit that I made in the spring of 2015 to countries in the world to convince ministers of finance to give their contributions to the SDGs. We realized that we were far behind in the negotiations on not having the finance ministers on board. So I went to see finance ministers in several places, mostly Asia. And there wasn't much knowledge at that time in the spring of 2015 on the SDGs. But I came to Korea. And in Korea, I met the finance minister. And he was remarkably informed about the SDGs. I was struck. He knew the state of negotiations in New York on these different 17 goals. So I said to him afterwards, why are you so well informed? I mean, you're briefed to the smallest detail. Oh, you should know, I'm not only Minister of Finance, I am Minister of Economic Planning. So let's start a movement to make Minister of Finance realize the difference between cost and investment. Anyway, I also would like to say something about cities. I think cities have a tremendously important role. When I was ambassador in Washington, I remember going to places where the awareness of climate change and environmental work was so imposing and impressive. I think of Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and also the different states that have their own legislation. But I think the mayors of cities and leadership of cities have a certain pride in independence and taking their own steps for their own population, their own people. And I think there is a very good potential in the cities really going climate neutral and showing the way. And I think Michael Bloomberg stands up for that, although maybe his chances to take over for Trump aren't that big. Well, I won't go into politics either. I have retired from politics now. I also have one point to make before I conclude, and that has to do with the debate, the discussion on climate change. We have seen in the world recently an unfortunate polarization in our countries. The us and them societies are growing, and the outside world is seen as a threat and a problem. Not least Trump is painting that picture. And I think they are using issues like migration and refugees to strengthen that polarization. And the sad thing is that it seems to pay off also politically. But what I don't understand is that the climate change issue also takes on the qualities of polarization. The feelings that are expressed towards Greta and the young people demonstrating on the streets now, the contempt of their engagement is very dangerous. And there is even a tendency to look at the climate change issue in the left and right perspective among political parties. And even now, because of the view of certain activities of the youth, as a generational issue. And I think if we are to be successful in our work and to bring about the mobilization that is necessary, then we need to make sure that the work on climate change becomes a unifying movement and a consensus movement. Because this issue is so serious, we can't afford to play politics with it and use it as a tool of polarization. And if we do that, then we can, in a much better way, move on the issues to bring in the different actors that are necessary. As I said, not only governments and international organizations like UN and European Union, but also the private sector and the civil society and all the actors that I mentioned earlier. And I think that is a very important step forward if we move in that direction and get that strength from all of society, because it is a task that has to do with the future of our young people, and the planet will stay on, but the conditions under which we live will be much different. And during my years at the UN, I have seen climate change. I have seen the rising sea level in the area of the Bengal Sea and around Myanmar and Vietnam. The Mekong Delta has now salt water coming in, killing the sweetwater fishing. I have seen in the Sahel area how droughts and dry weather makes people move and deepens poverty. So I think we need to see that this is our task for the future, but we should not be overwhelmed. I remain a worried optimist but worried. But I think we need also to divide the problem into different sectors. We can't solve all problems at one time. We need to see, as Dag Hammarskjöld has written in his book, Markings, he says the future is two things. The future is the vision. Without vision, we can't achieve anything, as you said, Laurent. But the future is also every step you have to take tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, next week, next month. In other words, the hard work that you need to have. But we need to have a direction. And the direction is set by the SDGs, the Agenda 2030, the Survival Kit for Humanity, and by the Paris Agreement that Laurent so strongly contributed in his forceful leadership in Paris in December 2015. So thank you very much.